Tonight we welcome Janine Tessarzik, better known as Janine Throws, Highland Games heavy games athlete and record-breaking athlete also. Janine grew up local to our Albany store and now lives in Ohio. So welcome, Janine. Janine, I have been so excited to speak to you as I love a bit of sport and I'm intrigued to know all about the Highland Games, what it involves, how you train and everything about it. So shall we begin? You started out as a Highland dancer. So you've got Scottish heritage. Where did it all begin? How did you get into Highland dancing?
So I did a couple years of ballet and tap when I was really little, like 4, 5, 6. And after a couple years, we were attending the Capital District Scottish Games actually, because it's always been a family tradition. My family has been going for years and years and years. And so, I mean, this is 35 years ago about this would have been. And they had Irish step dancers performing as well as the Braemar Highland dancers performing or as part of the Highland dance competition. And my mom asked me if I'd be interested in doing either the Irish or the Scottish dance, because we have both Irish and Scottish heritage. And I said I wanted to try the Scottish dancing. So I ended up doing that for about 7 or 8 years.
What skills from that then? Are there skills you've taken with you into the games?
Yeah, I would say the body awareness, the strength that you develop as a dancer in general. And I think especially the type of dancing that Highland dance is, with the leg strength and everything that you develop, I think that definitely carried over into the when I started doing shot put and discus in 8th grade. That definitely helped. And discus was my most competitive event when I as a track and field athlete. And I think, you can see the coordination and some of the grace in that event that I think definitely carried over from the dance background.
Yeah, well, they always say footballers should do some ballet, don't they? So it's all that, and for them it's about speed of their feet. But yeah, no,
I mean that too for sure. I mean, and being, you say that, and that immediately brings to mind, like with the sword dance, how precise you have to be with your footwork around the swords, especially after the initial step, and how that precise foot placement and footwork definitely translates over to all of the throwing events, like other than like sheaf toss and weight over bar, where your feet are just like they're planted and hammered, but for stones and weights for distance and and caber and everything, knowing where your feet are, being able to get your feet in the right spot is big. Yeah
Fantastic. So you've set lots of records at school as well, so shot put and discus and other things. So was that the start of your interest in the Highland Games and the heavy events, or?
No, I remember I was at a competition, I was at a games somewhere in the Northeast when I was still dancing, and my memory is we were like walking like onto the grounds of the festival, and like on the edge of the festival they had the sheaf toss, and they had like a kids sheaf toss, and I remember trying it so I must have been around 10 years old, somewhere around there, so that's the first time I remember ever trying something like the Highland Games. And yeah, I mean, I set my school, I have my school records. I still have the school records, Guilderland High School, in shot put and discus. And crazy side note, because of TikTok, I met the young woman who has come the closest to breaking my records since I was in school. I graduated in high school in 99. And she sent me a DM or commented on one of my videos and was like, "Hey, did you go to Guilderland High School? I think you have the school records at my school." And we've become friends. Like I spoke at she was one of the leaders for the feminist club at the school. And she invited me to speak virtually at one of their meetings. And then the woman who was an assistant coach at my undergrad school, she was a sprints coach. She's now the head coach at Georgia, University of Georgia, which is where Cadence ended up going to college. She just started this fall. And so I was able to connect Cadence with Coach Carroll. And so Cadence is actually going to be a team manager for the track team. So that was a really cool random kind of connection between, all that stuff. And it's because of Highland Games that I that my TikTok, did what it did. So I had those school records, and then but it took a long time. I mean, it was 18 years later that I got involved in the Highland Games as a thrower after high school, So I kept doing track and field on and off. I coached for quite a few years. And then, and when I was in 2012, that was the first time I attended a Highland Games and saw women competing. And so that was kind of in the back of my head. And then a few years later, it was 5 years later, then I was just looking for something to do and occupy my time. And I was like, hey, let me try signing up for this. And the rest is history.
So when you say you signed up, then what did you do? When you say, was that just for an event you signed up, or for training or coaching, or?
For a competition, there was games in Norton, Ohio, and I didn't just sign up and show up the first day. I did some training. I'd been working out. I did some training, some practicing, with as much as I could. Most of it I learned it when I got there. I think I practiced some shot put because I was training for a track meet later that year, late summer. So I was doing some throwing anyway. But yeah, most of it. And I bought a kilt. I bought a used kilt off a guy in the area. But yeah, most of it was very new at that first games.
Yeah, well, I always wonder. I'm like, could I just enter and turn up and have a go, or is there minimum criteria then?
So sometimes you can just sign up and go. Ideally, in that case, you would want to look for a games that offers a novice class. And really, if you're someone, I'm kind of in a different position than someone who has no throwing background, because I've coached throwing events and I've competed and trained as a thrower for a really long time. So it's not going to take me that long to figure out how to throw something else, because because of all that. So for someone who doesn't have any kind of throwing background, I would say if you can look for a clinic, some regional groups that run the games and have training groups, they'll offer, maybe like a newbie class or something where you can go and a little workshop or something. Sometimes it'll be before the festival starts, before the heavy athletic competition starts, or the day before or early in the day, or they might have something to help facilitate novice throwers in learning how to throw. One of the pieces of advice I give, because I get asked all the time, what do I do? How do I get started? And I have a video pinned at the top of my TikTok page that I recorded earlier this year that just kind of ran through how I got started and ways that you can get started. One of the best things you can do is find a local training group, or a thrower. Find someone, if you can't find one of those organized things that you can't access one of those, find someone or a training group that you can go and observe. And universally, I would say Highland Games athletes are very welcoming, and we know that new throwers are the lifeblood of the sport. We need to have more people interested in participating to support what we're doing, to sustain the sport. So I've had a couple of people reach out to me, and I've done, a couple hours just giving somebody, there's a guy that competed at the Ohio Scottish Games. It was his first games. And he came up from Columbus, and we just spent a couple hours and I ran through all the events. I don't have a caber, but everything else I ran through it. So he would at least know what the motions are, how you get a fair throw, all that stuff. So yeah, but there are especially if you're in like a larger metro area, it's going to be more likely you're going to find someone, but there are training groups all around the country for sure. In the US, and this is of course very like US centric, because I live in the US, so that's where I'm focused. But there are groups in Canada, and if you're lucky around the world, there might be somebody close to you too. So yeah.
And so talk us through the different events then. You obviously tried the sheaf toss as a youngster. So then what else? Tell us all about them and what they involve.
Yeah, sure. So there are 9 events total, and you can group them into distance events, an accuracy event, and then height events. So there are 6 events in the distance events, really 3 disciplines, and each with a light and heavy version of them. So altogether, that's 6. So there's the stones, the weights for distance, and then the hammers. The stones, the heavy one is called the Braemar stone. And for that one, you're not allowed an approach, which means you plant your feet and you take your attempt. There's no movement. There's no forward movement allowed in that event. And then the open stone is what we call the lighter version of it. And for that one, you're allowed an approach, and there's no mandatory technique. You'll see a lot of different variations at games. A lot of people will use very traditional shot putting approaches, like the glide or some variation on the rotation, like maybe a half turn or a South African, for anybody who knows what those are. And then or I do like a step back. Some people do like a shuffle. The right way to throw is whatever gets that stone to go the farthest. So those are the stones. And then for the weights for distance, you have a heavy and a light version. The technique is largely the same for both of them. The timing's a little bit different because of the weights of the implements. It looks a lot like the typical style that most of the more proficient throwers will use is like a 2-turn, and it looks a lot like a double discus throw, like coming out of driving and then throwing. I should mention the weights for those. So for open men and women, which is any ages of thrower, for stones, the heavy one is going to be for women like 12 to 16, for men like it's heavier. It's like, I want to say it's like over 20 pounds, somewhere in that range. The open stone for women, like 8 to 12, for men, like 16 to 20. For masters athletes, most of the weights are the same for athletes that are 40 and over. When you get over 60, some of the weights will drop down. So they might have a lighter stone for these, but I'm not as familiar with all of the way things break down once you get over 60. And then for youth athletes, they may have lighter implement as well. For the weights for distance, heavyweight for open women is 28. For masters women, it's 20. For open men, it's 56. And for masters men, it's 42. The light weights for women are 14, regardless of age group. And for men, it's 28, regardless of age group. 60 plus, again, I think the heavyweight drops to 35. I'm not sure what the lightweight drops to for men. Yes. And then the hammers. So the hammer, it looks kind of like a mace typically. There's a big ball on the end of a PVC pipe. Typically PVC. Some people will use rattan handles. Those make me nervous. I haven't seen them very often, but the last time I was at a games that used one of them broke while the thrower was taking an attempt. So I'm not a huge fan of the rattan handles personally because of that experience. The weights for this is one where you're not allowed an approach. Feet planted, swing it around and throw. And the right number of swings is however many you throw the farthest with, again. But some people will take as few as like 1 swing. Some people will take maybe up to 4. I think a 3 is probably more typical. 2 or 3 is pretty typical. Heavy hammers are 16 and 22 for women and men, and lights are 12 and 16 for women and men. Yeah. And that's both age groups, open and masters. So those are the distance events. All right. The accuracy event is everyone's like the classic event of the Highland Games is the caber toss. So it's actually not for distance. It's not for height. It is an accuracy event. Your goal as the thrower, once you have gotten your approach moving fast enough, you've gotten enough speed, and you pull, the goal is to flip the caber, to turn it, to have the end that you're holding in your hands go up and go like over the top and land away from you. And you'll see always a rear judge, a judge standing behind the athlete or moving behind the athlete as they take their approach. And what they're doing is they want to judge how the line that the caber lands on compares with the thrower's approach. So if you're looking like from above, it would be like on a clock, a 12 o'clock is a perfect throw. If it's to the left a little, 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock. And if you're unable to make the caber turn, you get it to go like up some, but not all the way. Typically you'll have a side judge who will like estimate what the angle is that the caber makes with the ground. And they'll give you, a 75 or whatever, whatever that is. Some games are what we call turn or no turn, where if you're unable to turn the caber, you don't get a score on it. That's typically, in my experience, has typically been at more competitive events. It's usually not, at a games that just is open to everybody. Typically, you want everybody to get a score. The turn or no turn is a way to help separate the competition a little bit better. And ideally, you want a caber that a good caber is one that about half of the group can turn. And if you go through a round and no one is able to turn the caber, at one competition, they actually cut some off the caber. And that's what I've heard is like what you're supposed to do. But that, cabers are one of the more challenging pieces of throwing equipment to obtain, because you can't just make it in a shop out of, lead and steel and whatever. You have to go find a tree, and it's really fascinating to see the variation in cabers that you'll get at all the different competitions. There have been a couple that I was at this year in September that had very straight cabers. Ones where like somebody quipped that you needed an arrow to show you which end was the end you were supposed to hold onto when you were throwing. Because, with physics, it's a lot easier to turn if it has a good deal of taper. You want the end up above you to be heavier than the end that you're holding at the bottom. And some of them will be like super smooth and like shellacked and the cracks all filled, just some of them are works of art with like painting on them and everything. And then some of them have had ones that look like they got cut down like the week before and they still had like bits of bark on them. And they were nasty to throw. So that's caber. And for women, I struggled sometimes to think of like, what is like, people are like, how heavy is the caber? And like, the weight is only one factor. It's also the degree of taper, and it's also like how wide it is at the top and how wide at the base, which corresponds to the taper, right? But I would say typically you'll see ones from like 50 to 80 pounds. 80 is like very, very extreme. Like that's very high level competition. You're not going to see that at a typical women's competition. And you might see some lighter cabers, lighter than that range. If you've got a group that has more developmental throwers, it might go down to 40. If it's much lighter than 40, that's like that's a very, very light caber. I've very rarely seen cabers lighter than that. And then for men, I'm honestly not totally sure. I think some of the masters cabers might be under 100 pounds. You'll see ones up to like 120, 140. I think that's on the high end for men's cabers. All right, so that's caber accuracy event, and then 2 height events. We've got the weight over bar, the sheaf toss. So I've been giving these in what we call traditional order. A lot of times we won't go in that order when we're competing, but if you go in traditional order, it's always the stones, weights, hammers, caber, sheaf, wob, and the heavy version and then the light version for those events and the distance events. So for sheaf, you basically you have standards or some kind of a bar. Think of like pole vault or high jump, and the thrower takes a pitchfork, sticks it through for women, it's typically 10 pounds of burlap or 10 pounds of twine wrapped in burlap. It looks kind of cubic. Typically, that's what the sheaf is. You stick your pitchfork through that. You take a couple swings with it, and you yeet it up over the bar. So for masters, women are not going to throw typically anything heavier than a 10, unless you're at the Arnold. That's heavier at the Arnold. I think it's like a 16 at the Arnold Sports Festival. Open women, in my experience, typically throw a 10. Sometimes they'll throw a 12, and at the Arnold, throw a 16. Amateur men will typically throw a 16 or a 20-pound sheaf. Professional men will throw a 20-pound sheaf, and then guys will throw a 28 at the Arnold. And that's the heavier weight at the Arnold is due to the fact that there's like a ceiling. So there's a limit on how high you can throw the thing. And and some of the most proficient sheaf tossers will be throwing it, 35 feet and higher on a good day. So those tacos will fly if you really get them going. And then the weight over bar, it's like a single arm kettlebell snatch throw. You have you hold the implement in one hand, take a couple swings with it, and then you it goes between your legs and up and over the bar. That's the typical technique for standing weight over bar. Some people will, and you have your back to the bar. Some people will stand on an angle, perpendicular to it, and do like a sling and throw it up over the bar. And some people will actually spin for a weight over bar or for a sheaf. Some people will spin for sheaf. But that is, some venues don't allow spinning for events because safety is paramount. And sometimes you just don't have enough room to be able to ensure that we're going to be able to conduct it safely if somebody's spinning, or it may just be, a preference or tradition that they don't allow spin at that event. And the way that those events progress is much like pole vault and high jump in track and field, if you're familiar with that, where you get to select the height that you're entering at, and then the bar will typically go up in 2 or 3 foot increments. And it may go if it goes 3 feet at first, then it'll drop down to 2 feet. And you get 3 attempts to clear the bar. As soon as you clear it, then you are able to go on. You're going to be able to go on to the next height. You don't have to take all 3 if you've cleared it already. And then when you get down to the last 2 throwers, at that point, they'll often let you select what increment you want to go by. So, when I was in Altamont, when it was down to the last 2 of us women, we went to one of the heights that we progressed to was kind of an odd interval to help to give one of us the opportunity to go for a personal record. So you might go 28.5 or 28.2 or something like that to kind of go for a new personal record rather than just going for 28 feet and tying your personal record. And for all of the events except for caber, typically the winner of the event is allowed to take up to 3 extra throws. We call them extras, to go for a personal record, a field record, just to try to go for some kind of record. So that's all.
What's your favorite then?
I really like weight over bar and the lightweight for distance. Those are 2 of my favorites. Sheaf is as I've gotten better at sheaf is really fun too. I genuinely I enjoy throwing. I love that. I don't always like throwing the 28-pound heavyweight for distance, but otherwise I enjoy throwing. It's fun. It is an enjoyable, pleasurable thing for me to do. So I love throwing. As far as coaching, I've coached myself pretty much the whole time that I've been competing. I've gotten some input from other people. I've gotten, especially, early on for weight over bar and for sheaf. There were a couple more experienced throwers that gave me some feedback on my videos that was incredibly helpful. But I watch my own video back, and at this point, especially now, I'm able to assess pretty well what I'm doing. Oh, I should say I did work with there's a thrower in Texas who does some online coaching. him for a few months. And he did, so there was some programming and then also video feedback. So that was like 2019 into 2020. I was working with him a bit, but for the last couple of years, I've been working on my own. And honestly, this calendar year, I really haven't done much throws training. I've gone out and thrown less than 10 times, I'd say, this calendar year on my own, but I've done 23 games, I think, this calendar year. So like, I've done a lot of throwing. Like, that's a lot of throwing. So I haven't done, training separate from that, but I have a lot of data that I've been able to analyze on, like, okay, how's my technique? What do I need to work on for the next games or whatever? I've taken a little bit of a break because I'm in law school. I started back this semester. So been very busy, and my season is kind of wrapping up right now. And so I'm kind of taking a little bit of a break from the gym. Also, the trainer that I had been working with, so I was working with somebody doing my programming since like last summer. And he got another job, and so he's not working at the gym anymore. And so I'm going to transition to working with one of my friends. I'm going to collaborate with one of my friends who owns a gym and she's a professional Olympic lifter as well. I'm going to work with her on developing my own programming, because I've been a strength and conditioning coach as well. So I definitely have the knowledge, but getting input from somebody else is super helpful as well. So we'll see how that works. I mean, I started working with a trainer because of the accountability of having someone, knowing that I'm expected to show up in the gym meant that I couldn't, let something else get in the way as much of me getting in there and training. So if it works, then I'll probably stick with training on my own for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so off season, you probably almost explained it there, but yeah, your off season, are you mainly gym work and then season time more throwing? And
yeah, I mean, one of the things about living this far north in the country is that it gets real cold in the winters. And so, in previous years, I have gone out and thrown some in the winter. And I haven't looked into it yet, but I want to see if I can get into my law school. The school that it's at, the university, has a massive indoor facility with a turf football field on the infield of the track. And so I kind of want to go see if that's something that as a student I'd be able to use and access. And same thing with the gym. I just haven't checked it out yet. Because if so, then I'll go in there and I'll train. I'll do some drills and do some throwing through the winter. I'm not going to have very long of an off season. I do like to take a little bit of downtime, especially because this coming weekend is weekend 8 in a row that I'll be out of town, and 6 of those weekends are competing. And so I am ready to take a little bit of a break from all the travel and just like take a little bit of a break. So it's, I'm kind of taking a break right now already. Like I said, from the lifting. But I think some people really need time away. I need just like a little bit of a rest, but I think I do better when I'm continuing on and keeping on throwing and training. And I've got again this year, just like last year, I'm already planning on throwing in January. There's a great festival down in the Keys in Florida, and they have this Ladies of the Keys event, and they have just two classes. They have open women and masters women, and they have like a 40 to 49 and a 50 to 59 or plus categories throwing together. And it's great. It can be really frustrating sometimes to see some of the festivals that with the heavy athletics that don't include women, or have a class for pro men but not for pro women. But at the same time, there are places where people are doing what they can to help increase opportunities for women. So which is fantastic.
And so then, do you training every day? What does a day in the life of Janine look like then?
Not every day. No. Listen, when most of the year I was like lifting twice a week and then throwing on the weekend. Like that's about maybe 3 times. Lifting 3 times a week. But spending like an hour in the gym. And that's about it. I mean, because I mean, at this point, I have spent so many hours throwing. If I and I have so many things in life, like if I'm really have a goal to like break a certain record or something like that, like I'm gonna shift my life and my schedule so I can really hone in on trying to break a certain record. But what I have been doing has been working. I mean, I turned 40 almost a year ago. My birthday's coming up in a couple weeks, and it'll be turning 41. And most of my personal records have been set since I turned 40. So I'm still seeing improvement. And so it's kind of like, like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I think that, I put in when I first started in the games, the balance was definitely way more towards throwing because I needed to learn all the points, all the technique of all the different throwing events. And I'm at that stage now where I'm going to get the most return on investing in getting myself stronger, and not necessarily like making all my maxes get a lot higher. It's more so, I think, developing like overall body strength, like more multi-joint stuff and like pull-ups and like things that are not, it's not just, I'm not trying to just get a heavy bench max. And I think part of that is like, I haven't been diagnosed as hypermobile, but I'm hypermobile. And so, developing strength around all the different joints to help stabilize myself so that I'm able to transfer the force most effectively while I'm throwing.
Very interesting. So we've obviously just opened our store in Albany, which is very exciting. So we went for the first time to the games at Altamont, so that was great. Very exciting day. So have you got a favourite? Because that's where you're from. Is that one of your favourite games, or have you got favourites around the country? What?
That absolutely is one of my favorites. I've thrown there now. I threw in 2017, 18, 19, 21, and then this year. So I've thrown there 5 times. And that's absolutely one of my favorites. And the new athletic director, Carrie Russell, this was her first year fully in charge of the athletics, and she did a fantastic job. Like there's a great MC. They do a great job of featuring the different athletes. Like when we're on hammers, like they only have one thrower going at a time. Same thing on cabers. And the part of why that games is so fantastic is because like not only it's well run, we've got good equipment, the great MC, like we're treated well and with respect, and the crowds are absolutely fantastic. Like, I mean, you've been there, right? Like you see like the huge throwing field that we've got. When you're at Caber, by the time you're there, right after lunch, it's like 5 or 6 deep of people around the field cheering you on. And it's great planning. I mean, people that organize games I think that you should always put your athletic field adjacent to the beer tent, because you like, it's great. Like legit, like there's a games in Victoria, British Columbia, same thing. Beer tent is right next to the athletics field. And like, it's a great thing. Like people get their beers and they watch us throw, and it's a grand time for everybody. So Victoria is another fantastic festival. That was a great one. I threw in, I think some of it has to do with the location, like the combination of like the location plus how it's run and the fans and everything. But I threw in Palmer, Alaska at the Alaska Scottish Festival last year and this year in the summer. That is like, it's just amazing. Alaska is incredible, and the festival is fantastic. Crowds are great. So that one, the Longs Peak Scottish Irish Festival in Estes Park, Colorado, near Denver. It's in the national park. That one also is incredible. Like, you take a break from throwing, and I just like look around, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is like, it's amazing. Oh my gosh, I've done so many games now. It's like, I think I really enjoy throwing at big festivals where there are great crowds. Like those are always fun. Oh, I love the Smoky Mountain Scottish Games and Festival, I think is the full name. It's either Scottish Games and Festival or Scottish Festival and Games. Everybody's got like, a different combination that they use in the title. But I threw at the University of Tennessee for an undergrad. I was on the track team there, and that Games is right there in the area. It's not right in Knoxville. It was like in Maryville last year. It's in Townsend now. And that one again, and that's more like nostalgic for me, going back to that area and throwing there is like a big part of that. So yeah, so those are some ones. I mean, again, a lot of them. So if I'm not naming a festival, it doesn't mean that I dislike it. It just means like those ones are ones that just like are coming to mind right now, sticking out. Yeah. Oh, McMinnville. Oh my gosh. The one I would love to throw in Scotland. Haven't thrown. There's so many. The one in Moncton, New Brunswick hosted the Masters World Championships this summer. Yeah. And I think it was the largest, they set a record for the largest number of athletes at a Games in Canada. They were incredible hosts for us as the athletes. And like Sunday we had like a lobster dinner after we finished throwing. And it was just, it was incredibly well run. The amount of volunteers and everything and the that was fantastic. And then the McMinnville Games in near Portland, Oregon, that was like 2 weekends ago. I threw there last year and this year. And that is another one. Like the crowds are fantastic. The festival is run by people, like the overall festival, the main people in charge are people that have to do with heavy athletics. And so, I think, whether it's people with the pipes and drums or the dance that are running the festivals, the overall thing can have different impacts on how things are organized and run. And, I'm not in those meetings, so I don't know what it's like, but I know that festival run by athletics, kind of like it's awesome. And like this year, the director of it we were talking on Friday before the Games, and he was saying like pre-sale tickets were like, I want to say like double this year of what they were last year. And they're doing really, really good work. They also have Granny Fee's shortbread. This woman, Fiona, uses her Scottish grandmother Fiona's shortbread recipe. And like, it's not just because of the shortbread, but like I spend a lot of money on shortbread. It's so good. So shout out to Granny Fee's shortbread.
Oh, that's a good reason. I do a lot of cycling, and so I always like to go on one of the ones where they have good home baking on route. That's definitely never mind what the landscape is, as long as the home baking on route is good.
Yeah.
So you said you hadn't competed in Scotland, so you've not been over. Not
yet, but I want to make that happen. Like that, that was like the dream when I was a dancer. And yeah, I would love to. I am going to make that happen. I just haven't yet. I would absolutely love to.
Although I think, your games are actually bigger in the States. You probably get bigger crowds, and yeah, I just couldn't believe it. The ones I've been to have just been massive.
It's incredible. I mean, another great one, the Dublin Irish Festival down in Columbus. There's an area of Columbus, Ohio that's called Dublin, and they have like 100,000 people at this festival over the course of the weekend. So again, like just a massive, and my son had a great time. He came with me. They had this bouncy, like this kids area with all these like bouncy houses and stuff. And he just like bounced to his heart's content. One of my friends helped keep an eye on him when I was throwing, but I was able to take him over there before we started. And he had an absolute ball there. So yeah, he's always a fan of like, is there going to be another kid there? And like, will there be bouncy houses? And yeah, then it's a yes for him.
Yeah, no, well, that's good. If they're entertained, then it's good. You can focus on your throwing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have to ask you about tartans. So do you have a special kilt? You said your first kilt you just bought from somebody else. So have you got favorites? Have you got a special one you wear that brings you luck, or?
My understanding is that my family is we're Clan Campbell. So I wear, once I bought my first kilt, I bought a Campbell tartan. I have two. I have one that is short and one that's shorter. So but they're both Campbell tartan. So ever since I bought those in 2019, I think I got those 2018 or 2019. I've worn those at every games except there's the Dublin Irish Fest this year is the first games that I've forgotten my kilts. I was, and it's only 2 hours away. I drove there. I'm pointing like it's that way. And I was like an hour down the road and I was like, oh no, I realized that I'd forgotten it. And it was too late. I didn't have enough time to go back and get it and then still make it on time to throw. So I was like, I frantically called some of my friends that live down in that area, and some of them, some people that weren't throwing, they had some extra kilts. So in the videos from that one, I am not wearing my Campbell tartan. But otherwise, Campbell all the way.
Campbell all the way. So you don't have to have a different kilt. You don't add a bit of elastic in the waist or anything to make it more comfortable. You just wear a traditional kilt.
So it's not really like a traditional kilt that I wear. So as a dancer, I actually still have my dancer's kilt. And I had someone alter it. I need to do a little bit more work on it to like have it ready to wear. But there are a few different manufacturers that a lot of throwers will go to. One of the main ones is Sport Kilt. That's where I got my kilts from. And theirs have elastic all in the back. And they're affixed with Velcro. So they are adjustable. And that, for what we're doing. And I don't think that I would be comfortable, like knowing what the dancers' kilts are like. I don't think I would be comfortable in a kilt that doesn't have some give in the waist. And then when you're ordering a kilt from them, like you can get the most basic one without even the fell sewed down, which I see them and I'm like, I don't want to say things to people because like that's what they wanted. That's fine. But I'm like, having been a dancer for so long, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it doesn't look it. I like the look of a sewn down fell. And then you can opt to get the buckles on the side and additional pockets on the side. Theirs have when you open up the front apron, they've got a pocket in the front and the middle, which is great. And they're nowhere near the 5 to 7 to 8 yards of material, much less material. I think they're pleated to the stripe. I think typically. But yeah, and then there's some people will get like a utility kilt. Some people will just go buy a kilt off of like eBay or something, or even just something, a plaid skirt that's somewhat pleated that wouldn't necessarily like really fit as like a kilt. And I think that, that's one of the neat things about the heavy athletics is the bar to entry is really low, which I think is great for the long-term sustainability of the sport. Because like equipment can be really expensive if you're going to be training on your own. You can go get stones. And I bought an antique pitchfork for my sheaf fork and like ground down the tines and adapted it for myself. But the weights and the hammers, each of those will set you back about $100 or more. So it's not.
Do you take your own then? When you're
no.
competing, no, you don't. They give you on the day.
You take your own. If you have a pitchfork, a sheaf fork, you'll bring that with you. The event provides the implements, and everyone in your class will use the same implement. And kind of like speaking to that, coming from the track and field world, where everything was standardized and you brought your own implement, so you knew exactly how it was going to feel in your hand. You knew exactly how you were going to hold it and everything. Coming to the Highland Games world, where you have a different stone every time, and you don't know what the camera is going to feel like, and you don't know how much friction there's going to be when you put your tines into the sheaf. That used to be incredibly frustrating for me, because I was still learning, the fundamentals of how to throw a lot of the different events, right? So that was like one more element of variability that was a challenge for me. It was like one more thing to like overcome to figuring out how to throw the implements well. And And at this point in my development, because learning the fundamentals of the throw, like that is not, I can go in there and like throw, I know how to throw all the events. I don't have to really think about it. I have to think about like some specific cues to like get a good throw, but I can throw without thinking, right? But but now the fun is that the implements are different from games to games. And so that's also like, I love hitting a PR, but I'm not as caught up on hitting a PR. Like, I just want to do the best that I can at every event. And like, kind of the fun of the competition of going from one place to the next is, it really truly is, I think, a better test actually of who is the best thrower overall, because we're all putting our hands on that implement for the first time that day. And yeah, so that actually is more of the fun of it. And I think part of the reason that I've seen some improvement this year, I would say like my caber toss in particular, I think that I've gotten a lot better feel for the caber, is because I've had my hands on more than 23 different cabers, because sometimes we've changed cabers or we've had challenge cabers, an additional event. So like, the most events I'd done in a year in previous years was 16. So like, I've done so much. I've gotten my hands on so many different implements now. And because I'm not worried about how to learn how to throw the event, I'm learning how to figure out how to do better depending on what the unique characteristics are of the different implements. And so, and that for me, like, that's part of the fun of it too at this point, that's still keeping me like interested and engaged, is like, okay, what's the new challenge this week? Like what's going to be like the weird thing we're going to have to throw this week? So yeah, that's a lot of the fun of it now too. Yeah.
Fantastic. And what about your son then? Is he intrigued? Is he joining you?
He has not really. He'll like pick up something like occasionally, like he'll throw stuff. He's 6, so it's very young. Although I did see one of my friends in the master's class that throws in Texas, her daughter is right, or I think she might be 5, but she posted pictures of her throwing at a games and videos of her throwing at a games last weekend, and it looks like they had like a youth class. A lot of places I've seen, you're looking at 13 to 17 is what I've seen for the age group for youth. Or at one I saw recently. I think some places they'll go up to 19 for youth. But yeah, I think it's fantastic if you can adapt it and keep the kids, like, make sure, again, like safety being paramount, that they're safe while they're throwing. Like, I think that's fantastic. I think, we're not track and field, but I think that some of the things that I see track and field doing well, I think are some things that we could pull into the Highland Games. Like, we've started to have some variation in implements as you get older. Like I mentioned, having lighter implements for 60 plus, that's a relatively new development. And there are different opinions on that. I think some people, it's called the heavy athletics, and some people feel that staying true to that means if you can't throw the heavy implements anymore, that you don't throw anymore. And I think there are people who really want to keep throwing. And I think that that's one way that we can keep people involved in the sport as they get older and that's what they do in track and field. They have, like, as you get older and older, the implements get lighter and lighter. And similarly, scaling it for younger and younger athletes. I mean, that's a way to get people involved earlier on. And, whether people keep on participating in the sport, you've got more people that know about the sport or knowledgeable about the events that are more likely to be invested fans, that will help support the whole, like, heavy athletics ecosystem. So I personally, I see value in that myself. But yeah, and like things like having a lightweight class, like that's a relatively recent development as well. Having, for men, I think it's under 200 pounds, I think. And for women, I think it's under 150. It might be 155 for masters. I'm not totally sure. And again, like there's no single governing body for Highland Games for heavy athletics. So there could be variation depending on where you are in the country for some of this stuff.
So interesting. Thank you so much for joining me. That's been fantastic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Super.
Very interesting. I'm intrigued even more so now. Gonna have to go out and get my caber ready.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great scene though, isn't it? It's just, yeah. I don't know, there's a lot there I think that can be done with it, and a lot of fun, like you say. It doesn't have to be heavy and serious, and the more people we
Yeah.
get involved, the better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that having some flexibility is a good thing. Like being adaptive and, you know, balancing objectives, right? Like one example, this is a minor thing, but at the last games I was at, um, I mentioned you get 3 throws and then you get to take up the 3 extra throws in competition. If you win the event. I was in a combined group. It was like a super group. They called us the Titans. So it was men and women, masters and open. There was a lightweight thrower in there. And we threw our like respective weight implements for the events where we had different weight for the heavyweight and for weight over bar, but for everything else, the women are all throwing the same implement. Anyway, for the lightweight for distance, the guy who won and I were both taking extra throws. And I think my best throw going after 5 rounds, I think my best throw was like a 72 and he had gone 73 something. And I was up first and I was like, asked the judge, I was like, what did Danny throw? And he said 73, whatever. And I was like, I bet. So I went in there and I threw 74-3. And so then he's up. He's like, oh, 74-3. All right, let's go. And he threw 74-3. So after 6 rounds, like we're not competing against each other, but the MC is of course playing it up for the crowd, right? Like, oh, she's trying to get whatever. So we're like, I think one of us was like, hey, like, I think Danny asked like, hey, do you think maybe like, let's take another throw? And we were like, yeah, I mean, like, it's not going to count. Like, they're not going to be able to enter it in the record books or whatever. But like, how entertaining is that going to be for the crowd for us to get like another throw, extending the competition a little bit more, seeing what we can do. And so I went first and I went like 76 and then he went 71 and like the crowd loved it like that. And that's one of those cases where, they could have easily said, nope, you get 6 throws and like, that's it. But like, they let us take another throw and it's that much more entertaining for the crowd. And, the heavy athletics is this balance of sport and entertainment. And I think in some ways it's kind of like WWE, like professional wrestling in a way. Like there's spectacle and there's costumes and you've got an MC and like there's definitely some ways that it is different, but like we are definitely entertainers out there on the field. And especially when you have like a featured class, whether it's a pro class or like this one was not a pro class, but it was the Titans class, right? And it could be like whatever your featured class is for that games, like we're definitely more, the balance is a little more towards entertainment. There's definitely still the athleticism and the sport and the competition, and those two interplay. The competition can feed the entertainment value, but those are the games where like, and I'm always trying to entertain the crowd and interact. And like, if I've got breaks, like trying to talk to the crowd and answer questions that they have. Cause some people that have been going to these games, they know what they're watching. They know what the stuff is, but like most people, a lot of people are clueless about what the event is and how heavy it is. And like, what are you doing? And so, somebody told me really early on, like engaging with the crowd is huge. And so I've always really tried to do as much of that as I can. And I think that it's this, it's like, it just is cumulative. Like the more people that know about it, the more support we're going to have, the more opportunities we're going to have. Like it all builds on itself. So yeah. So looking at that entertainment side and, keeping in mind, and that's part of why I do a lot on social media, is because I'm able to get Highland Games in front of a ton of eyes and getting more people interested, because it's so much fun. It's entertaining to watch. And like, people just need to like learn what it is. And then so often, like I've heard over and over again, people say, like, comment on my videos, like, or if I'm like comment when I'm live or whatever. And they're like, oh, like your video randomly came across my feed. And then I started looking and this is so amazing. I'd never heard of this before. This is amazing. And they become fans of the sport. And like, then they're going to come out and support the festivals, and support the spot. You know what I mean? Like it's a whole anyway. So yeah.
No, fantastic. I love the passion. It's very good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, well,
thank you so much for having me on. Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'll meet you in person one of these days. Next season, hopefully.
Altamont next year. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.